Straight up with a twist.
What's up, humans? This is Katie Rose, Straight Up with a Twist. How you guys doing? It's been a busy week, a great week for my family financially, my small family that it is, and my 3 cats. Just getting lots of double time and work, especially after coming back from a long vacation. It's kind of nice to recoup what you feel like you've lost, of course, which I didn't lose my sanity. If anything, I gained some of that back from this vacation, which was totally needed. I actually do this thing, and my husband always makes fun of me, but I'm always planning my next vacation while I'm on vacation. Like, I just get so excited about planning stuff and seeing the world and going different places and trying everything. So I immediately went and looked to see what was in store for next year and was checking out. I have a timeshare that I bought a long time ago. I used to sell timeshare. Not sure if you know that. But it's kind of like working for the mafia. So I didn't feel like it, fueled my soul. So I kind of had to leave that job. But I mean, I've used it. So it was not a bad purchase for me. I would actually preferably like to sell it now so that I can use that money towards possible surrogacy. So if anyone's in the market, I will literally just sign it over to you. It's paid off. Then the maintenance dues are like the lowest you ever find. But anyways, there's your sales pitch of the day. Watched a movie last night with the hottest man on the planet, Chris Hemsworth, called Spiderhead. I'm like, what? Why is it named that, really? It doesn't really, I mean, I guess it has to do with the head, but it's more about like injectables and what they cause your body to do. But it was interesting. Definitely a different role for Chris Hemsworth. So glad to see he was branching out. It had its, Chris Hemsworth comical moments. But it was a serious movie otherwise, and obviously makes you think about life and control and things like that. I think every time Chris Hemsworth's name is posted, it should just underneath it say the hottest guy that ever graced the planet. I literally can't watch anything with him in it because I'm like, how does a human being look that good? Like, move over, Brad Pitt. There's another guy on the scene. His eyes are just stunning. Like, he even has these kind of, feminine eyelashes, and it just makes them sparkle. Like, I don't even understand. His body is just a wonderland for sure. So there's that. And, thinking about, making babies, because every time I think of him, I think of, wow, what would my child look like if I had it with him? Sometimes I'm just like, oh, I wish a baby would show up on my doorstep, but that's kind of illegal. You can't just keep a baby that ends up on your doorstep. So that brings us to today's topic, which is about adoption and safe havens. And what is that? How does it work? What is it all about? I'm still learning, so I'm not going to be 100% accurate on everything I speak about, but I did do some research, as I typically like to do before talking about subjects like this. Now, obviously, with my situation, even insurance doesn't really cover IVF. If you're fortunate, you work for the Disney company or Starbucks or something like that, they will cover a certain amount. So up to a certain amount. And that's a one-time life benefit. It doesn't like renew every year, which, wouldn't that be wonderful if it renewed every year? But as I've mentioned before, everything is, voluntary. So this is they consider all of these things a voluntary procedure, which obviously it's not elective for me. I did not elect to have a broken uterus or, whatever my issues that are unexplained are. So it's very frustrating in our medical industry because they know it's expensive too. So they're like, well, we don't want to pay for this stuff. We just want to collect our insurance money in case of something happening, because usually those things don't happen to people. But thanks for your money so that we can cover it for the people that the weird stuff does happen to, that the, unknown, that the unfortunate things happen to, whatever. Well, this is an unfortunate circumstance in my opinion. So why we don't have these benefits or this coverage is very frustrating when we are paying a lot for insurance. And like I said, it's hurtful to think that for a surrogacy, like I'm, that's elective and I'm hiring somebody to do this and that's an elective choice. Well, no, I would just use my own uterus if I could, but it doesn't seem to be working. I will be starting another round of IVF. We had to postpone it just for some work stuff that came up and weddings and things like that. So we will be starting our journey again in October, and we've kind of already mapped out a plan with our doctors. So we've got another 2 months to try naturally. So hey, there you go. We're gonna keep trying that. So a lot of women consider this a medical condition, and at this point, I mean, I do. It's not something, like I've done everything that I can. There's not a specific, medicine that works for it, but I am being treated, so it should be considered a medical condition. Many insurance companies will only offer special riders that extend coverage to surrogacy only for a set amount of time. So usually it lasts for the duration of the pregnancy and the following months of recovery. So there are some instances, but it's very rare that there's any insurance coverage for this. Now there's the baby in the basket story. So yet, it's that's the colloquial term, but it's baby Moses laws, is as they call it, which is yet another reason to accept changes in society and religious views, because obviously, we're not allowed to do that anymore. We can't just pick up a baby in a basket and be like, it's mine now. And, we've got laws. So things do change over time. And, there are rules when interviewing parents, which I'm going to get to in a minute, because there's some things that happen that are sad to know that that's happening when there are parents that really are trying their best to maintain a perfect home to bring a child into it. But the safe haven laws are there, and they've been enacted as an incentive for mothers in crisis to safely relinquish their babies to designated locations. So these babies are protected and they're provided with medical care, basically until a permanent home is found. So safe haven laws generally allow a parent or an agent of a parent to remain anonymous. So they are not culpable criminally and not prosecuted for child endangerment or abandonment or neglect. So they surrender the baby, and that's their exchange. And now they've given up their rights. And so that's kind of one of the hardest parts about this, is that a lot of times when women do that, they're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe they didn't have, the right support around them. And then they just, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. Can I have my baby back? Well, no, you can't. There's laws, and and every state's a little bit different, but usually it's about 14 days. And that's it. You've got 14 days to reclaim your baby. Otherwise, it's given up to the government and it's put in the system. And, the focus on these laws is on protecting newborns from endangerment by providing these parents with an alternative to criminal abandonment. And in most states, mothers are the only ones that are allowed to relinquish the baby. Other hospitals, healthcare facilities, emergency clinics, fire stations, they all have safe haven laws. And then inside some of these safe havens, without even seeing a person, is a baby box or a newborn safety device designed to keep the baby safe from those environmental dangers. So basically what happens is that, the woman decides, I don't want this baby, I just had this newborn, and they drop it off in a box, and it's this protected box, and it will trigger a call to 911 or to whomever is employed, and still keeps the mother anonymous. So it's actually a pretty quick turnaround, because most baby boxes are responded to within 30 seconds. So it's literally like you drop off your baby and you run away so that you stay anonymous. And then they contact local child welfare. In most cases, they provide medical treatment if necessary, of course. And the mother has to accept that they no longer have control over who eventually adopts their baby. And that's just the reality of it. And a lot of times, too, these adoptions and where they're going to be placed can take up to a year. And I mean, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today is just how long this process takes, and how it's really difficult for the parents and for the children. And so the mother can't specify what kind of contact they want to have with them in the future, as you would if you decided to give up your baby for adoption and go through the proper channels. More than 23,000 children every year are emancipated or aged out of the foster care system with no family, no guidance, no money, or shelter, which is why a lot of them become homeless. And adopting outside of the U.S. is actually cheaper, which is why it's such a struggle. And people are like, oh, why are you doing that? Why wouldn't you just adopt an American baby? It's because it's actually cheaper. We've got so many legal fees so that lawyers and attorneys can be paid. And sometimes, even when it is cheaper to go and outside of our country, the travel is expensive too. So there's all of these things to consider when we're looking into adoption. So I wanted to look into my options because obviously the most expensive option is surrogacy, which is of course what I want to do because then that would be my egg and my husband's sperm. But it's so expensive. And, after speaking to a lot of people, it's like I'm trying to see if there are any more charities, but the number one thing people say to do is just to start a fundraiser. And I'm looking at all of these options and different ways that I can do fundraising if we come to that point. But then I also wanted to look at adoption and see what the options are. So I did learn a lot. The first thing to know is that private adoption goes by many different names. So, they reference it to domestic or infant adoption. And those are pretty much the same process. So, broadly speaking, private adoption occurs when hopeful adoptive parents work with a private adoption agency to adopt an infant from the U.S. And then on the other side of that process, a prospective birth mother voluntarily chooses to create an adoption plan for her baby. And the thing is like if let's say I wanted to, have a baby from a birth mother and I'm like, let's do this. And I give my criteria. It's not like when you pick a cat and there's a bunch of pictures and you get to pick that baby. There are very small private, sectors where you can be like, oh, I like this child. Then they're still going to go based off your criteria. But in most cases, the birth mother always chooses who she wants the parents to be, the adoptive parents to be. So if you saw the episode of Friends or Monica and Chandler and she's like, oh, I picked you guys because of XYZ, whatever. That's really how it works, which I'm sure some people would argue, well, if she's giving up the baby anyways, why does she care? I should have the say in picking, the mother, and I want to see what she looks like and all of these things. And I know it becomes very vain sometimes, and I'm sure the process can be, but it's also the rest of your life. So there's just so many, different things to consider. So, and you won't be picked. So they won't pick you if you're too picky. I mean, legitimately, that's how it works. So you have to have, a broader criteria so that they will come to you quicker, because sometimes this process could take 1 to 5 years. So imagine that I'm being home studied, which is what the process is called. And they come here because currently I have 2 bedrooms and they're both used for our hobbies and our work, our home offices and things like that. There are no beds in them. They are not a nursery. But imagine I'm like, okay, well, they're going to come home study. We got to make sure we have a room for our baby, hun. And then we create this nursery for a baby. And here's the thing. You might have an age range, right? So then you're like, okay, well, here's just the space. Like maybe we shouldn't get a crib yet because what if we get like an older child? And so imagine just like the mental effery that you have to go through to like create the space for something you might not get to meet for 2 years, maybe 5. It's tough. The whole process is tough on both ends of the stick, of course. So the private thing is different from foster care. So, and international adoption, where children are waiting for families, due to causes far outside the mother's control. So there's always going to be a different story with everything, which is why a lot of the agencies, like it's a process. And the private agencies, obviously it costs more money to go through a private agency. And it's because you're kind of like narrowing things down and they have more control over all of these little aspects, where in the public system, they don't. It's like what you see is what you get. They know the kids, but like a lot of times they're dealing with like so many different, like 35 per social worker, and they are just like, great, what's your criteria? Like, let's see if it works out and we'll, hook you up. But it's just, you're not going to get to be as picky, I suppose. And of course, with the private agencies, when placement occurs, the information's passed along, and that can be really helpful, especially for like if medical needs arise in the future and you're going to know more. So like a lot of these kids that are put in the system, you don't know about their parents' past. You don't know where they came from because they abandoned their kids. So you're like, well, we don't actually know. But in these private things, you actually get medical history and you get to know a little bit more. So it's kind of like you're paying for that premium price, which sounds sad, but it's just the way it is. And that's why they encourage mothers not to do the safe havens. They want you to go through the proper adoption agencies so that that child has a better chance at finding a family in the future. But when you're, in the moment and you're scared and you didn't want this baby, or, you're not healthy, then you do make these decisions and you don't realize how it's going to affect the future of your child. However, the safe haven options are great. It's definitely better than a baby just being abandoned and, eventually die. So there are always pros and cons depending on what you're looking for. And a lot of times with these private agencies, like, things can go awry, things can fall apart. A mom can actually change her mind in the middle of her pregnancy. It could be, 6 months in and she's like, nah, never mind. I want to keep the baby. And you just have to deal with that. And basically, the law is once you consent. So once you sign those papers, which they don't have to do it at the very beginning, but once those papers are signed, then they have 30 days to rescind and change their mind. But after the 30 days, it is the legal right of the new parents. So there is, you got to really pay attention to what you're getting into and what those legal rights are. But a lot of times with these agencies, if it doesn't work out, you don't get that money back. That money they just roll the money over. They're like, okay, great. So let's try it again and let's go to the next, adoption situation. And it's not guaranteed, and so the process can be a very long process, and you can get disappointed. And it's kind of, I'm not comparing this to buying a house, but geez, I mean, with the contracts and everything, it's like, same thing. It's like you could go in to adopt a house and you lose the house and you had your dream set on this house and then it doesn't work because of all of these other scenarios that could have happened, and people can change their mind. And you just got to say, okay, but guess what? Some of that money, that money that you put on the inspection, gone. You can't get that back. There's going to be losses along the way. So that's why you have to be financially prepared for these things. And looking into it, in a public adoption, children placed with foster families can range from newborns to age 17, but it's more unusual to adopt a newborn through the public adoption system. As I said, the process takes a while, and the typical wait can range from 1 to 5 years. But since the ultimate goal of the foster care system is to reunite biological parents with their children, it can take much longer because a lot of times these kids are taken from their homes because somebody said, hey, this person, I'm calling in to social services, this kid's not being taken care of, and they take the kids away, and then they hope that the parents get better or whatever the situation is, and then they can reunite them with their families. So, a lot of times, even as a foster parent, you can be heartbroken because, like, you fall in love with this child that you've been fostering in hopes to adopt, and then the parent is better, and then they come seeking their child, and it can be very devastating. And there are some older children that are, often able to be adopted immediately, which is great, but older kids aren't as desirable to some parents. But the good news is, which I didn't realize until looking into it, is that the state can fund you a monthly payment. And it's not like some, astronomical, amount of money, but it's just, to help care for the kid for like groceries and things like that. So, and I hope it's not true, but there might be people out there who are like, oh, great. So if I adopt a kid, the government's going to give me money once a month. So then, that can help me. And, maybe they don't want to get a job. I don't know if that happens out there. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's not that much money that you should be doing that anyways, because kids cost money. If you have them, you know it. And it was so funny. We were on the phone with a friend the other day, and he's got like 6 kids, and they're screaming in the back, and me and Damon looked at each other like, you sure you want a baby? Like, woo, that sounds lovely, actually. I think the noise is a beautiful thing because once the kids grow up and the noise is gone, you kind of want it back, don't you? But, this kind of ties back into, the recent Roe versus Wade and abortion laws. And it's like, is it better to abort or to abandon? I mean, neither of them are good, but, it's reality. And I think the problem, with the conservative right is they're afraid to see the reality and that these things happen. And all anybody was trying to do was find a way to help in unforeseen circumstances and when people don't have the support that they need. I was actually at a rent-a-center not too long ago, and the owner had told me that he gets people in who will rent furniture just to make their houses look good for that week when they do their home studies. And then they return their furniture, and then they don't really have all that stuff just so they can get their kids back, which is such a sad circumstance because I'm sure that some of them just can't afford this stuff, but they really want their kids back and maybe they've gotten better. But on the flip side of that, maybe they're just lying so that they can get a kid and have a monthly, rent. I'm not really sure what the situations are, but he told me that they specifically will do it for that. So I don't know what those intentions were. He didn't make it sound like they were good intentions by any means. But he's like, happens all the time. He's like, we just get them in so they can pass their home study for the month. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just terrible. Absolutely terrible. All right, humans, this is your real estate tip of the day. One thing that has happened so many times is people have buyer's remorse, and often it's because they forgot to check out the area before purchasing the home. They drive out there once, they fall in love with the house, and they purchase and get under contract, especially with how crazy the market is right now. But they didn't take the time to drive around the area. What's the traffic like? What's the traffic like during school hours? So before going to school and after school lets out, check out those things. I've also had people that purchased a home and didn't even realize there were no sidewalks in their neighborhood, and they have kids and they're like, oh, we had no idea. We didn't even notice that. So make sure you're making a little checklist for yourself, your must-haves and deal breakers and such. And then also, like I said, take that time, go drive around in the daytime, drive around at night, drive around the afternoon on different days, and make sure that you know that area well. And if you take a toll road to work, make sure you check how many back roads it takes to get to said toll road. That way you can actually get a genuine estimate of how long it will take to get to work every single day with that traffic factored in. And don't forget about railroad crossings. And one of the good things that I did read is that most of these, seemingly profitable organizations are truly not for profit. Despite the fact that inter-country adoption is generally not profitable, some agencies have been able to remain viable because they have a diversity of programs. So, other agencies, they shave like a large endowment upon which they can sustain losses by deriving investment income. So healthy organizations have net profits and net assets, and adoptive families should be attracted towards that, rather than repelled by it, because agencies that have that healthy revenue, it indicates that the agency will have longevity and that they'll be able to serve you. Now, according to adoptioncouncil.org, program expenses account for 82% of the expenditures of these adoption agencies. So that includes compensation, benefits, rent, travel for employees, pass-through costs, personal costs, things like that. And only 4% of the revenue is spent on fundraising. So charity tracking experts, generally say that's great, A+ to nonprofits who spend less than 15% on fundraising. So I guess they're doing the right things. Now the directors do make upwards of $100,000 a year, which you always hear that with directors, whether it's, breast cancer associations and things like that. Some of them are making like $350,000 a year, and you're like, really? But they're not required to report compensation of executive directors unless it's over $100,000. But a lot of agencies do. And then the average employee there makes about, $35,000 a year. So that's, combined full-time and part-time. So, it sounds like they're doing all the right things, and I'm sure that they're being watched like hawks because these people are licensed and the government watches them because they also have their own organization and they can get in big trouble. So I know that they're being watched. So you always just hope that they are, practicing honestly, and especially for somebody, who is going through this and has to go through, these really difficult choices and financial decisions, you want these people to be on your side. So it does look like that. A lot of these organizations that I did look up, most of them have either become adoptive parents or they've been through surrogacy, things like that. So it's I'm looking at it I wonder if I could start working here, especially, depending on, where my life leads me, and you never know, right? Our lives can change paths very quickly, as it already has for me. Definitely not the path I thought I was going to be on. I thought I would have had a 3-year-old by now running around, and you know, and that's not what it is. But I just kind of thought, oh, you never know. Maybe I'll land working in this field and helping other women someday. In the meantime, I thought that was some interesting information. There's still a lot to learn. I've got a few friends who have adopted children before, and I really want to discuss my options with them and see not just, hey, how did you do it? I want to know what was life like? How was it throughout all of the years of this process? Because it doesn't stop once you adopt the kid. There's a whole, life that goes with it, and learning the child. And there's stories about people meeting their kid for the first time. Like I said, it's not like, hey, you just go online and pick a la carte and you just grab something and that's the kid I want, and there's a list. It's not like that. You're the one who needs to qualify actually to adopt this child. But we're not there yet. We're still very hopeful for baby Heath, and we'd love to see what our baby would look like. And, the next step for us would be to look into surrogacy, and just really break down the cost, because I've heard everything from, if you know somebody, it's only $20,000 to upwards of $200,000. So surrogacy can be all over the place. And, like I said, getting medical coverage and for the mother and all of those things, and living wage, and just everything like that. Lots to think about. But in the meantime, if you would like to reach out to me, you can comment on any of my podcast shows that I've done already on YouTube at Katie Rose Straight Up with a Twist. And I am going to be launching my Patreon soon. So then you can really show me your support. There's going to be some little added bonus episodes and things like that. And there's going to be different tiers that you can join into, merchandise opportunities, fun stuff like that, and the ability to chat with me more often and get some personalized answers, responses, and shout outs as well. So keep an eye out for that. I'm still building my audience. So thank you if you're listening. And I will talk to you guys next time. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for listening. This has been Katie Rose, served straight up with a twist. And I'm just going to leave you with this vulnerable quote for the day. The vulnerability that honesty requires isn't something that everybody can handle. Lying allows people to be comfortable. And your cocktail of the day is the Lavender Mezcal Ghost Donkey drink, which is what I had in Vegas. 1.5 ounces of Del McGuee Vita Mezcal, or your mezcal of choice, 1/4 ounce of Kettle One grapefruit, 1/4 ounce of rose vodka, a dash of Saint Germain, lavender syrup, and fresh lime, garnished with a charcoal salt rim and flour. And remember, if you're thinking it, I'm probably talking about it.